Okay, so as you can see from the before picture, this buffet was covered in, I would say probably about 4 or 5 different colors of paint, black being the last, and I could tell it was a spray paint. And so what I've done thus far is I have taken all of the paint off. I used a paint stripper, and unfortunately I didn't have very good luck with that. So I got some of the paint off by scraping in the paint stripper, and then I've taken a 100 grade sandpaper and I started sanding it. And as you can see, the top has a beautiful wood underneath. So what I've decided to do is stain the top a beautiful brown, and I'm going to do several different surfaces on the rest of it. And as always the case, when I got this piece, I had no idea what I was going to do, and once I found the hardware for it, then I knew exactly where it was going to take me. So I have this beautiful fabric that I'm going to be putting on the drawer fronts. As you can see, it's a really pretty French scroll, and I will be decoupaging that on the drawer front. And then I also found this hardware that I'm going to be using. And then the cabinet doors, I'm going to be doing a crackle paint with a black underneath. So I'm really excited to get started. I've just got a little bit of sanding left to do and take off the hardware, and then we'll get to the paint. So that's where we're going with it next. I wasn't going to say anything. Okay, so the hardware that came with this is a little bit, it's a little less ornate than I really want. So what I've done is I have purchased hardware, and that's actually what kind of got me in the mood to do the makeover the way I want to. Now the hardware does not fit these holes that are already here. So what I'm going to be doing is taking the hardware, and I'll be dipping just the very ends right here in paint, and that way I can make a mark right above these holes so that I know exactly where to drill, so I'm not having to measure anything. Since these holes are already centered, all I have to do is use those as my guide. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to mark these holes to be drilled, and some of the hardware will have these knobs on it and some will have these. So I'm going to get started on that right now. Okay, so what I've done is take just a little bit of flat black paint, and I'm just going to barely dab the ends in there. That way I can use this and center it right over the holes that are existing and make my mark. So now I know exactly where I can drill, right here and right here. And that's going to be how I mark all of the drawers from here on, so that I have them right where I want them because the holes that are existing are already centered, so we're just going to use those instead of trying to measure our own. Okay, that's all. So there. So all we got to do is just center it on both of those, and so then this we're going to do just dead center between these two holes, and then I'm going to fill these, and then on the other side I've got caps that I'm going to put over the holes on the underneath, and then I'll paint over the hole underneath. So there we go. Okay, so as you can see, we have these two previous holes, and what I want to do is screw another hole right in the center of that. But before I do that, I'm going to center punch it, and I'm going to get my spot right where I want to go. Now you can do it with a center punch or in a pinch. I'm just using a Phillips tip screwdriver. I found my center point, and I'm just going to punch a hole in it so that I have my spot, so that when I drill it's not going to split the wood, and I've got my center spot where I already know I'm going to be putting this hole. Okay, so I'm going to drill the hole through for my drawer pull, but make sure when you drill that you always brace your material so that you've got full control. Okay, so there's going to be a couple of spots that are dinged pretty badly that I'm going to fill, and normally I use the wood filler in a putty form, and I just use my little trowel, but I got this stuff by mistake, I guess. I wanted to try something different, and it's really hard to use. It's really hard to get it out of the container. So I'm having to use my finger and apply it and then go over it with my putty knife. And it's kind of been a pain so far. So I'm going to fill all of the little spots that have some dents in them. And as soon as that dries, I'll be able to finish sanding and we'll get started painting. Okay, so I'm finishing up the first coat of paint, and this is going to be my base paint, and I'm going to be using a crackle paint on over the top, especially on the cupboard doors. But what I'm using for this particular paint is just a flat enamel, and I've made my own mixture of chalk paint using half a cup of water, half a cup of plaster of Paris, and 1.5 cups of paint. So right now I'm getting on my first coat. Now these particular drawers are going to be covered in fabric. I'm going to decoupage a fabric over the top, but I want them to have a nice, clean, smooth finish before I start the decoupage, so I'm getting the first coat of paint. So because I'm using chalk paint, you can usually use just one coat. However, this is an old piece, it's been sanded down, so I'm going to use 2 coats and get a nice smooth finish. and most of the most of it I'm going to be waxing it, but the cabinet doors I'm going to be doing the crackle finish, so I'll be using a polyurethane over the top. So just going to keep painting. Okay, so to demonstrate how I'm going to do the crackle paint on the cabinet doors, what I've done is I went ahead and done a nice base coat of black, and that's what I'm doing on the doors. And then what I'm going to do to create the crackle paint is I'm just going to use regular Elmer's glue. So how I'm doing it is I'm just putting a heavy coat of glue on the brush and just brushing that all over my base coat, getting it fairly thick, not worrying so much about pattern or whether it looks good. All I'm doing is coating it with the Elmer's glue. Make sure to get it on pretty thick. And what the Elmer's glue does is, as it's drying, it shrinks. So you want to make sure that you put your top coat, which is going to be my antique white. You want to make sure that you put that over the top before the glue is dry. So what I would suggest to do is wait just a couple minutes. Make sure that the glue feels a little tacky, and then go right ahead over the top with your top coat. Okay, so as you can see, it's starting to shrink just a little bit, and some of it's starting to get a little bit clearer in color. Our demonstration board it has old paint on it. It's really textured. I don't really mind that when I'm trying to complete a shattered crackle look, because I like it to be textured and I want it to look really old. But this is just for demonstration purposes. If you want a bigger crack, you want to leave the glue quite a bit heavier and not so dry. Smaller cracks, you want to let it dry just a little bit more, but I want bigger cracks, so for the purpose of this, I'm going to put my top coat on while it's really wet still. So now as I put my top coat on, I want to apply it really heavy, and you can't really go back and forth. It'll feel like it's not completely covered, but going too far back and forth over the glue will make it smooth it out a little too much. If you want it really crackly, you want to keep it fairly thick and don't go over it too often. As you can see, all of my paint strokes are in the same direction, going back and forth. This will allow for your cracks to be in one direction. And as you can see, it's already just been a couple minutes and it's already starting to separate. As the glue starts to dry, it'll separate more and you'll start getting cracks, and the cracks will all go in one direction. So a good drying time is about 6 hours. We're not going to film for 6 hours, but you'll be able to start seeing it in time lapse. As you can see, it's starting to separate and it's starting to crackle a little bit. It's been about 2.5 hours right now. Paint is still pretty thick, and right here in these little cracks, it looks white, but when it's all dry, the base coat of black is going to start showing through. So we can see it's well on its way, and because we did all of our paint strokes in one direction, the splits will all go in one direction and all of the crackle will be in that way. So for the dresser, I've just painted the board itself, the base color, using the flat interior enamel black paint, but I made it with plaster of Paris. So basically I made my own chalk paint. And to make your own chalk paint, you use half a cup of plaster of Paris, half a cup of warm water, and 1.5 cups of paint. So I went through the whole thing, painted the entire door the flat black, and then I wanted to do a crackle finish, and I wanted the exterior paint to be a white so that there was a contrast in color. And I wanted to have the same contrast as the fabric that I picked for the drawers. So what I did to make my crackle finish is I just basically took regular Elmer's glue, and I used a regular brush and I put it on pretty thick, and I covered the entire door. Now you have to work very quickly because it dries very fast, and so what I did is waited until it was just a tad bit tacky, and then I went over the top with just my interior flat paint, and the color was called Elegant Lace, and so the color kind of matched this a little bit. So I put it on as soon as it was tacky. When you first put it on, it looks like there's nothing gonna happen. It just looks like it's covered in paint, and it took about an hour before you really started seeing the cracks, and by about 3 hours it was fully dry to the touch, and so at that point the color was just a little bit too light to match my fabric. So I went over it with a dark wax and just lightly waxed it. So for my drawers, I took a fabric, as you can see, this fabric, and I wanted my top drawer and my bottom drawer to have this little gray insignia, whatever this is, and I wanted them to be slightly off center. So I took the fabric, measured it out, after having covered everything in the flat black chalk paint. I measured it out, and then I used a medium matte finish decoupage and decoupaged my entire drawer, laid the fabric on and made sure I had no bubbles or anything, smoothed it out with my fingers, and then covered it again in the decoupage or Mod Podge. And it gave me that flat finish that I was looking for. And as you can see, with all the drawers in here put together with the crackle paint, it looks really good. And the top, I had taken the entire stain off of the top, or the paint. It took me probably 2 days to remove all of the paint. And so then I stained the top. I still have one more coat of stain to do, and then a clear gloss over the top to make it really shiny, and it all matches together. And this was all, the inspiration came from the hardware that I picked. I wanted to do something unique, and I wanted this to be a statement piece. And as you can see, it really turned out that way. Removing